history reveals a sequence that has dismantled three major governments across the last 250 years. And presently, in 2025, the United States is tracing that identical sequence, phase by phase, complaint by complaint, almost as though we're following instructions inscribed in violence and turmoil. In 1789, France stood as Europe's most formidable nation, prosperous, sophisticated, progressive. And within 5 years, the regime was toppled, the monarch was executed, and the nation plunged into the terror, where 40,000 individuals were killed for political offenses. In 1917, Russia was an expansive empire. The Tsar governed 180 million subjects. The armed forces had recently participated in World War I, and in 8 months, the complete regime disintegrated. The Tsar was killed. The Bolsheviks seized authority, and 20 million would perish in the civil conflict and eliminations that ensued. In 1959, Cuba was a thriving Caribbean nation, American visitors, gambling establishments, operational economy. And in 2 years, Fidel Castro toppled the regime, seized everything, and transformed the nation into a communist autocracy that persisted 60 years. 3 occasions, 3 uprisings. 3 instances when an apparently stable regime collapsed into turmoil. And every occasion, the authorities never anticipated it. They believed they were invulnerable. They believed the masses would never revolt. They believed the structure was too powerful to collapse. They were mistaken every single occasion. And presently, every warning indication that preceded those 3 uprisings is visible in the United States. The prosperity disparity, the regime corruption, the disappearance of confidence in establishments, the fury accumulating beneath the exterior. We're not advancing toward the sequence, we're in phase 4. And history indicates phase 5 and 6 arrive rapidly. This is the narrative of how uprisings occur, why regimes never anticipate them, and why the mathematics indicates we're subsequent. Before we examine the sequence, you need to comprehend what an uprising actually represents. Not a demonstration, not a disturbance, not political transformation. An uprising is when the existing arrangement is completely demolished and substituted with something novel, frequently something inferior. Uprisings don't occur because individuals are impoverished. Poverty has existed throughout all of human history. Uprisings occur when anticipations surpass reality, when individuals believe they merit superior conditions than what they possess, when the divide between the privileged and everyone else becomes so severe that the social agreement fractures. And most significantly, when individuals lose confidence that the structure can repair itself, that the regime, the tribunals, the elections, any of it will address their complaints. When peaceful transformation becomes unattainable, violent uprising becomes unavoidable. That's not extreme theory. That's John F. Kennedy's precise language. Those who make peaceful uprising unattainable will make violent uprising unavoidable. And history demonstrates it every single occasion. France, Russia, Cuba, 3 different centuries, 3 different ideologies, but the precise, identical 6-phase progression. Let's examine how it actually unfolded. Let's commence with the origin of all contemporary uprisings, France. 1789. In the 1780s, France was the center of European civilization. Paris was the cultural capital of the planet. French was the language of diplomacy. The arts, philosophy, science, all flourishing. King Louis XVI occupied the throne. The monarchy had governed France for 800 years. It appeared eternal, immovable, but beneath the exterior the decay was total. This is phase 1 of every uprising, severe prosperity disparity. In 1789, France had 27 million individuals divided into 3 estates. The first estate, the clergy, possessed 10% of the territory and contributed no levies. The second estate, the aristocracy, about 400,000 individuals, possessed 25% of the territory and contributed almost no levies. The third estate, everyone else, 26 million peasants, laborers, and middle class possessed 65% of the territory and contributed all the levies. Let that register. 1.5% of the population contributed no levies, while 98.5% bore the complete burden. It wasn't merely levies. The aristocracy had privileges. They could pursue game on peasant territory. They could demand labor. They resided in palaces while peasants starved. By 1788, a poor harvest caused bread valuations to surge. Bread was 88% of a peasant's budget. When valuations doubled, individuals couldn't consume. But the aristocracy, still consuming five-course meals, still hosting lavish gatherings at Versailles? The divide between the prosperous and everyone else wasn't merely economic. It was a complete disconnection from reality. This is Phase 2, regime corruption and incompetence. King Louis XVI was not malevolent. He was weak and indecisive. France was insolvent from conducting conflicts, including assisting America in the Revolutionary War. The regime owed billions. And Louis' resolution? Borrow more, raise levies on the peasants, reduce nothing. The aristocracy refused to contribute levies. The clergy refused. And when Louis attempted to transform, they obstructed him. Because the individuals with authority would rather witness the nation burn than surrender their privileges. Sound recognizable? By 1789, France was in crisis. The regime couldn't satisfy its obligations. The individuals couldn't afford sustenance. And Louis summoned the Estates General, a representative assembly that hadn't convened in 175 years. He believed it would legitimize new levies. Instead, it became the ignition. This is Phase 3, middle class demolished and radicalized. The Third Estate, which included not merely peasants but also attorneys, traders, an educated middle class, demanded equal representation. They desired one ballot per individual, not one ballot per estate, which provided the aristocracy and clergy a 2-to-1 superiority. Louis refused. So, on June 17, 1789, the Third Estate declared itself the National Assembly. They secured themselves in a tennis facility and pledged not to depart until France had a constitution. This is the instant when the middle class, the educated individuals who should be supporting the structure, revolt against it. When attorneys and traders declare the regime is illegitimate, that's when uprising becomes unavoidable. July 14, 1789, Parisians attacked the Bastille prison, a representation of royal authority. They eliminated the guards, displayed their heads on spikes through the streets. The uprising had commenced, and it intensified rapidly. This is Phase 4, disappearance of confidence in establishments. The monarchy, the church, the tribunals all lost legitimacy. The National Assembly abolished feudalism, confiscated church territories, declared the rights of humanity. But it wasn't sufficient. The extremists kept advancing. Phase 5, revolutionary movement obtains mass backing. The Jacobins, led by Robespierre, demanded more severe measures. They desired to execute the monarch, redistribute all prosperity, eliminate the adversaries of the uprising, and they obtained popular backing because the moderates had failed to accomplish. The economy was still in crisis, sustenance was still scarce, and individuals desired violence. January 21, 1793, King Louis XVI was executed by guillotine in public. His spouse Marie Antoinette followed in October, and then the terror commenced. Phase 6, regime toppled, turmoil ensues. From 1793 to 1794, the Committee of Public Safety, led by Robespierre, executed 40,000 individuals, aristocrats, priests, political adversaries, even fellow revolutionaries who weren't extreme enough. They termed it purifying the uprising. It was mass elimination. The guillotine operated daily in Paris, public executions as entertainment, and the elimination kept expanding. Initially the aristocracy, then the moderate revolutionaries, then anyone accused of counter-revolutionary thoughts. No trial, no evidence, merely accusation and death. Robespierre himself was eventually executed by the identical structure he established, because uprisings consume their own offspring, always. By 1799, France was exhausted. 10 years of turmoil, economic collapse, conflict on all fronts, and Napoleon seized authority in a coup, became emperor. The uprising that commenced with liberty, equality, fraternity, concluded with a military autocracy that would drag Europe into 15 years of conflict. The lesson of France, severe disparity plus regime incompetence plus disappearance of confidence in establishments, leads to uprising. And uprising leads to turmoil, terror, and frequently autocracy inferior to what preceded. Now let's advance forward 128 years. Russia. 1917 by 1917, Russia was a backwards empire governed by Tsar Nicholas II. The Romanov dynasty had governed for 300 years, and Russia was enormous. 180 million individuals, spanning from Europe to the Pacific. But beneath the imperial facade, the identical decay. Phase 1. Severe prosperity disparity. The Tsar and aristocracy possessed everything. The peasants, 80% of the population, possessed nothing. They'd been liberated from serfdom in 1861, but most still labored territory possessed by aristocrats, compensating rent they couldn't afford. In the municipalities, factory laborers toiled 12 to 14 hours daily for starvation wages. Child labor was common. Safety regulations didn't exist. Meanwhile, the Tsar resided in palaces. The aristocracy hosted celebrations that expensed more than a peasant would earn in a lifetime. The divide wasn't merely economic, it was feudal, medieval, and unsustainable. Phase 2. Regime corruption and incompetence. Tsar Nicholas II was a catastrophe. Weak, indecisive, and completely disconnected from reality. He believed in divine right, that God had selected him to govern, and therefore no transformation was necessary. When laborers peacefully marched to the Winter Palace in 1905 to petition for improved conditions, his guards discharged weapons. Hundreds eliminated. Bloody Sunday. It demolished any remaining confidence that the Tsar cared about his individuals. Then arrived World War I. Russia entered in 1914, and it was a catastrophe. Millions of poorly equipped soldiers dispatched to perish. Officers were incompetent. Supply lines collapsed. Soldiers battled without bullets. Entire divisions surrendered because they had no ammunition. By 1917, Russia had suffered 3 million casualties. The military was deserting. The economy was collapsing. And the Tsar? Still residing in luxury. Still making determinations based on counsel from Rasputin, a mystical holy individual who had influence over the Tsarina. February 1917. Bread disturbances in Petrograd, St. Petersburg. Women in bread lines commenced protesting. Laborers joined them. The military was summoned to restore order, but the soldiers refused to discharge on the crowds. They mutinied. Phase 3. Middle class and military revolt against the regime. When the military won't defend you, the regime is finished. The Duma, Russia's parliament, demanded Nicholas abdicate. And on March 15, 1917, he did. After 300 years, the Romanov dynasty concluded, not with a conflict but with a whimper. A provisional regime assumed control, led by Alexander Kerensky. They promised transformations, elections, a constitution, but they made a fatal error. They maintained Russia in World War I. The soldiers desired peace. The individuals desired sustenance, and the provisional regime accomplished neither. Phase 4. Disappearance of confidence in establishments. The provisional regime lost legitimacy within months. They were perceived as weak, incompetent, obligated to foreign authorities. And into that vacuum stepped Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks. Phase 5. Revolutionary movement obtains mass backing. Lenin promised 3 things. Peace, territory, bread, conclude the conflict. Redistribute the aristocracy's territory to peasants. Feed the individuals. Simple, direct. And the Bolsheviks constructed a disciplined revolutionary organization prepared to seize authority. October 25, 1917. The Bolsheviks initiated a coup. They attacked the Winter Palace, detained the provisional regime, and Lenin declared Soviet authority. The complete operation required less than 24 hours, almost bloodless. But what ensued wasn't. Phase 6. Regime toppled. Turmoil ensues. The Russian Civil War persisted from 1918 to 1922. The Reds, Bolsheviks versus the Whites, everyone else. Monarchists, liberals, foreign intervention, it was total conflict. And the Bolsheviks prevailed through ruthless terror. The Cheka, the secret police, executed anyone suspected of counter-revolutionary activity. Entire villages eliminated. In July 1918, the Tsar and his complete family were executed in a basement, shot and bayoneted. Even the offspring. By 1922, the Bolsheviks controlled Russia. But the expense was catastrophic. 10 million deceased in the Civil War. Famine eliminated millions more. The economy was demolished, and Lenin's promises? Peace signified surrender to Germany in humiliating terms. Territory signified collectivization and famine. Bread signified rationing and starvation. The uprising that promised liberation accomplished autocracy. Stalin would assume control in 1924 and eliminate 20 million more in eliminations and famines. The lesson of Russia. When regime incompetence encounters military defeat encounters revolutionary organization, the complete structure can collapse in months. And what substitutes it is frequently far inferior. Now let's examine the most recent example. Cuba, 1959. This one is different because Cuba wasn't a backwards peasant society. It was a relatively thriving nation. In the 1950s, Cuba had one of the highest standards of living in Latin America. Havana was termed the Monte Carlo of the Caribbean. Tourism, gambling establishments, American investment. But beneath the glamour, the identical sequence. Phase 1. Severe prosperity disparity. The prosperity was concentrated in Havana and among privileged connected to President Fulgencio Batista's regime. The rural impoverished, especially in eastern Cuba, resided in poverty. Sugar plantations dominated the economy. American enterprises possessed much of the territory. The returns flowed out of the nation or into the accounts of a small privileged. Meanwhile, rural Cubans had no health treatment, no education, no opportunity. The divide between Havana's nightclubs and the rural countryside was enormous. Phase 2. Regime corruption and incompetence. Batista was an autocrat who seized authority in a 1952 coup. He canceled elections, governed by decree, and the corruption was total. Police could be purchased. Tribunals were manipulated. Political adversaries were imprisoned or eliminated. American criminals operated the gambling establishments with Batista's blessing, compensating him a portion. The regime existed to enrich Batista and his associates, nothing else. And when individuals protested, the response was violence. Secret police, torture, disappearances. This established fury, especially among young educated Cubans who witnessed their nation being plundered. Phase 3. Middle-class radicalized. Fidel Castro was an attorney from a relatively prosperous family, educated. He could have been part of the privileged, but he witnessed the corruption and selected uprising. In 1953, he led an attack on the Moncada barracks. It failed. He was imprisoned, but at his trial he delivered a speech that would inspire thousands. "History will absolve me," he stated. He was released in an amnesty in 1955 and traveled to Mexico to plan. December 1956. Castro returned with 82 individuals on a vessel termed Granma. They landed in eastern Cuba. Batista's forces ambushed them. Only 20 survived and escaped to the Sierra Maestra Mountains. Most revolutionaries would have surrendered. Castro didn't. This is where the sequence accelerates. Phase 4. Disappearance of confidence in establishments. Batista's brutality transformed the population against him. When the military razed villages suspected of assisting rebels, they established more rebels. When police tortured students, their classmates joined the uprising. Castro's forces expanded, not because of ideology, because Batista was despised. And the United States, which had supported Batista, commenced withdrawing. When your foreign patron abandons you, you're finished. Phase 5. Revolutionary movement obtains mass backing. By 1958, Castro had thousands of combatants. Urban resistance cells in every municipality, backing from peasants who perceived him as their defender. And Batista's military was collapsing. Soldiers deserted, officers fled with stolen capital. On January 1, 1959, Batista fled to the Dominican Republic with $300 million. Castro entered Havana on January 8, victorious. Phase 6. Regime toppled, turmoil ensues. Initially, Castro promised democracy, elections, unrestricted press. But within months, the facade dropped. Political adversaries were detained, trials and executions. The press was censored and Cuba became a communist autocracy. Castro seized everything: factories, farms, enterprises. Anyone who resisted was imprisoned or executed. Hundreds were shot in the initial year, thousands fled. The middle class that had supported Castro because they despised Batista. They learned too late that uprising doesn't bring freedom, it brings novel tyrants. Cuba remained an autocracy for 60 years. Fidel governed until 2008. His brother Raul until 2018. The uprising that promised liberation accomplished poverty and repression. The lesson of Cuba: even in a relatively developed nation, corruption and brutality can initiate uprising, and the revolutionaries once in authority become the novel oppressors. 3 uprisings, 3 nations, 3 centuries. France 1789, Russia 1917, Cuba 1959. Different context, different ideologies, but the precise, identical 6-phase sequence. Let's analyze it, because once you perceive it, you'll comprehend why what's occurring in the United States presently should terrify you. Phase 1. Severe prosperity disparity. In all 3 cases, prosperity was concentrated in a tiny privileged while the masses struggled. France, aristocracy and clergy contributed no levies. Russia, Tsar and aristocrats possessed everything. Cuba, Batista, and connected privileged plundered the nation. The specific numbers varied, but the sequence is identical. When the top 1% control 25 to 40% of prosperity, when the divide between prosperous and impoverished becomes visible and insulting, resentment accumulates. This alone doesn't cause uprising. Disparity has always existed, but it's the foundation. Confirmed. Phase 2, regime corruption and incompetence. In all three cases, the regime was perceived as illegitimate. France, Louis XVI couldn't transform and kept borrowing. Russia, Nicholas II was incompetent and disconnected from reality. Cuba, Batista was a corrupt autocrat. When regime exists only to serve privileged, when corruption is obvious, when incompetence leads to crisis, individuals lose respect for authority. Confirmed. Phase 3, middle class demolished and radicalized. This is the crucial phase. Uprisings don't commence with the most impoverished. They commence when the educated middle class loses hope in the structure. France, attorneys and traders led the National Assembly. Russia, students and intellectuals joined the Bolsheviks. Cuba, Castro was an attorney. His supporters were educated urbanites. When the individuals who should benefit from stability revolt against it, uprising becomes likely. Confirmed. Phase 4, disappearance of confidence in establishments. When individuals cease believing in elections, tribunals, police, the social agreement is fractured. France, the Estates General became a revolutionary assembly. Russia, soldiers refused to defend the Tsar. Cuba, everyone recognized Batista manipulated elections. When establishments lose legitimacy, when individuals believe the structure cannot be transformed from within, they seek alternatives outside the structure. This is the point of no return. Confirmed. Phase 5, revolutionary movement, obtains mass backing. This is when organized groups offer an alternative. France, the Jacobin. Russia, the Bolsheviks. Cuba, Castro's 26th of July movement. They promised justice. They promised to punish the corrupt. They promised a superior future. And individuals desperate for transformation support them, not because they admire the revolutionaries, because they despise the current regime more. Confirmed. Phase 6, regime toppled. Turmoil ensues. This is the culmination. The old order collapses. France, monarch executed. Terror ensues. Russia, Tsar executed. Civil conflict eliminates millions. Cuba, Batista flees. Castro becomes autocrat. And here's the sequence within the sequence. The uprising never accomplishes what it promises. It accomplishes violence, eliminations, and novel tyranny because uprisings are led by extremists. And extremists don't construct, they demolish. The moderates who desired transformation, executed or exiled. The individuals who believed uprising would bring freedom, they learned too late that turmoil is inferior to corruption. Now let's discuss the United States in 2025 and why every warning indication is flashing red. Phase 1, severe prosperity disparity. Confirmed. In 1980, the top 1% in America controlled 8% of prosperity. Today, 32%, higher than France in 1789. The top 0.1%, about 130,000 households, possess more prosperity than the bottom 90%, about 117 million households. The divide between billionaires and everyone else is larger than any period in American history. Larger than the Gilded Age, larger than the 1920s. The prosperous are visible: private jets, mega yachts, space tourism. While the middle class can't afford residences, healthcare, or education, while millions labor multiple jobs merely to survive, the fury is accumulating and it's justified. Phase 2, regime corruption and incompetence. Confirmed, trust in Congress is at 15%. Trust in the Supreme Court is collapsing. Half the nation believes elections are manipulated. Insider trading by members of Congress is rampant. Lobbyists compose legislation. Corporations possess politicians and nothing gets accomplished. Infrastructure is crumbling. The obligation is $36 trillion and climbing. Challenges that should be resolved aren't because regime doesn't serve the individuals, it serves donors. When both parties are perceived as corrupt and incompetent, when voters believe the structure is manipulated, confidence in democracy perishes. Phase 3, middle class demolished and radicalized. Confirmed. The American middle class is being hollowed out. College is unaffordable, housing is unaffordable, healthcare expenses are bankrupting families, wage growth is stagnant while asset valuations explode. And young individuals, educated young individuals, can't achieve what their parents possessed. They're drowning in student obligation, can't purchase residences, can't commence families, and they're furious. When attorneys, teachers, engineers, the individuals who should be succeeding are failing, they radicalize. They seek someone to blame and they discover targets. The privileged, the billionaires, the structure. This is how uprisings commence, not with the most impoverished, with the educated who anticipated superior. Phase 4, disappearance of confidence in establishments. Confirmed. We're here presently. Trust in media is at all-time lows. Trust in police has collapsed. Trust in elections is fractured. Half the nation believes the 2020 election was stolen. The other half believes the January 6th disturbance was a coup attempt. Neither side trusts the other. Neither side believes the establishments are legitimate. The tribunals are perceived as political. The FBI is perceived as political. Everything is perceived through partisan lens. And when that occurs, when individuals cease believing in shared establishments, the nation is no longer united. It's two nations occupying the identical territory waiting for an ignition. France had the Estates General. Russia had Bloody Sunday. Cuba had Batista's brutality. America? It could be anything. A contested election, an economic crash, a political assassination, a police incident that goes viral. The kindling is dry. We're merely waiting for the match. We're in Phase 4. And history indicates Phase 5 arrives subsequently. Phase 5, revolutionary movement obtains mass backing. This hasn't occurred yet, not fully, but the components are forming. On the left, there's expanding backing for socialist policies. Prosperity redistribution consume the prosperous rhetoric. On the right, there's expanding backing for authoritarianism, strongman leaders, extra-legal measures. Both sides increasingly believe the structure is fractured beyond transformation, that it requires to be demolished and reconstructed. When the moderates lose control, when the extremes obtain mass backing, Phase 5 is here, and we're closer than most individuals realize. Phase 6 is what no one desires to contemplate, because Phase 6 is turmoil. In France, 40,000 executed in the terror. In Russia, 10 million deceased in civil conflict. In Cuba, autocracy for 60 years. American exceptionalism states it can't occur here. We're too stable, too prosperous, too democratic. That's what they stated in France. Russia was an empire that had persisted 300 years. Cuba was thriving and contemporary, and all three collapsed. The sequence doesn't care about exceptionalism. So what would Phase 6 resemble in America? No one recognizes precisely, but history provides us clues. Political violence intensifies, not disturbances. Organized violence, assassinations, insurgency, the military and police fracture. Some units side with the regime, others with the revolutionaries. Supply chains fragment, sustenance shortages, fuel shortages. The economy collapses because no one trusts anything. States attempt to secede or refuse to recognize federal authority, and foreign authorities interfere. China, Russia, they'd admire to witness America burn. The turmoil could persist years. Millions could perish, and what emerges on the other side won't be the America we recognized. It could be authoritarian. It could be fractured into regions. It could be something inferior. That's Phase 6, and the sequence indicates once you're in Phase 4, it's very difficult to halt. 3 uprisings, 3 identical sequences. France, Russia, Cuba? Each occasion the privileged never anticipated it. Each occasion they believed they were safe. Each occasion they believed the masses would never revolt. And each occasion the divide between prosperous and impoverished, the regime corruption, the disappearance of confidence, it all combined into an explosion that demolished the existing order. The United States is in Phase 4. The prosperity divide is inferior to France in 1789. The regime is as dysfunctional as Russia in 1917. The confidence in establishments is as fractured as Cuba in 1958. And the sequence indicates Phase 5 and 6 are arriving. Maybe we can halt it. Maybe we can transform before uprising. Maybe the structure can repair itself. But the sequence indicates otherwise. The history indicates otherwise, and the warning indications are everywhere. 3 occasions it occurred. Each occasion they believed they were different. Each occasion the sequence prevailed. If this opened your perception to where we actually are in the cycle, subscribe. Because when Phase 5 commences, when the revolutionary movements obtain mass backing, you'll desire to comprehend what's occurring and why. The answers aren't hiding in the future. They're inscribed in the past. And I'll demonstrate where to examine.